two warriors, separated by 800 years and 1,000 miles. One was forged in the most brutal military system the ancient world ever produced. A warrior who began training at age 7. Who slept on the ground. Who ate almost nothing. Who was taught that returning from battle without his shield was worse than returning without his life. The other was the product of a culture that celebrated violence as divine. A warrior who believed dying in battle was the highest honor his gods could grant him. Who crossed open ocean in an open boat. Who raided monasteries, cities, and kingdoms with an aggression that made empires build walls. This is not a simple question. The Spartan and the Viking were not just different fighters. They were different philosophies of violence. And understanding which philosophy wins requires understanding what each one was actually built for. Before we put these two warriors on the same beach, we need to understand exactly what they were. Starting with the Spartan. Because everything about the Spartan warrior, every weapon, every tactic, every psychological tendency, was the product of a system so extreme that no other civilization in history has tried to fully replicate it. At age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their mothers and entered the EPILOGUE, the state military training system. Not a school in any sense the modern world would recognize. A decades-long program of deliberate hardship, designed to produce one specific outcome. A man who felt no fear. Not because he was stupid. Because fear had been trained out of him. So thoroughly, so early, so completely, that it genuinely did not arise the way it did in other men. They slept on reed mats they cut themselves. They were given enough food to survive, not enough to feel full. They were taught to steal to supplement their rations. The lesson, not that theft was acceptable, but that getting caught was unacceptable. They marched without shoes in winter. They fought each other, controlled, supervised, but genuinely violent, to learn pain management. The product of this system, a fully trained Spartan warrior, was something the ancient world had no comparison for. Not just physically capable, psychologically different. A man trained to find his identity, not in individual glory, but in the cohesion of the formation. The phalanx. The phalanx was not simply a battle formation. It was a physical expression of Spartan social philosophy. You protected the man on your left. He protected you. If one man broke and ran, the man beside him died. A Spartan who abandoned the phalanx was not just a coward. He was a criminal. He lost his citizenship. His family was shamed. He was, in every meaningful sense, socially destroyed. The Spartans' weapons were purpose-built for the specific kind of fighting the phalanx required. The hoplon, the large round shield, was not primarily defensive. It was the mechanism of the phalanx. Dropped, the formation collapsed. Held, the formation was almost impenetrable. The dory, the thrusting spear, was the primary killing tool. Used overhand or underhand. Driven into the gaps between shields. And the xiphos, the short sword, for close work. When the lines pressed together, and there was no room to use a spear, the Spartan warrior was in his optimal environment. The open field hoplite battle on firm ground. The most effective infantry soldier the ancient world produced. His optimal environment. That qualification matters. Eight centuries after the Spartan phalanx was the defining military technology of the Mediterranean world. A different kind of warrior was redefining what violence could look like. The Viking warrior's most important weapon was not the axe, not the sword, not the shield. It was the longship. The longship's shallow draft, sometimes less than a meter, meant it could navigate rivers that ocean-going vessels couldn't touch. It could beach directly on shores with no port facilities. It could appear, without warning, at any point on any coastline, accessible to water. The surprise was built into the engineering. The Viking warrior was not the product of an institutional training system like the EPILOGUE. He was the product of a culture that wrote sagas celebrating martial excellence, that had a theology in which dying in battle was literally the highest possible honor, the direct route to Valhalla, the hall of the slain where the greatest warriors feasted, a culture where the ability to fight was expected of every free man, where failure in combat was a social failure, and where the reputation earned in raiding was one of the primary markers of social status. The Viking arsenal was broader than popular culture suggests. The axe, yes. The iconic bearded axe, with its distinctive curved blade. But the most common Viking weapon was actually the spear. Affordable, effective, versatile, used by the ordinary warriors, who made up the bulk of any raiding force. The axe and sword belonged to the men who could afford them, and who had demonstrated the skill to use them effectively. Viking combat was fundamentally different from Spartan combat in one crucial respect. It celebrated individual excellence. The saga hero who broke through the enemy line alone. The warrior whose personal combat skills decided the outcome of a skirmish. The Viking shield wall, their primary formation, was effective, cohesive, hard to break. But it was not the phalanx. It depended more on individual courage, and less on the kind of drilled automatism that made the Spartan phalanx almost machine-like in its execution. And then there were the Berserkers, Viking warriors who fought in a state the sagas describe as beyond ordinary consciousness. A battle frenzy in which pain seemed not to register, in which the normal human hesitations about killing and dying apparently dissolved. Whether this was a psychological state, a pharmaceutical one, some historians suggest, the consumption of specific mushrooms, or simply the extreme end of what intense cultural conditioning to violence produces. Their reputation was real. They were the shock troops, the element that broke formations, not through tactical superiority, but through the specific terror of men who appeared not to be afraid of anything. Now, put these two men on the same beach, and let us be very honest about what happens. Let us build this honestly, because the honest answer is more interesting than the simple one. First, the terrain. The beach is not ideal for the phalanx. The phalanx performs best on flat, open ground, where the formation can maintain its precise alignment as it advances. Sand shifts underfoot. Rocky terrain breaks the line. The beach gives the Vikings a slight environmental advantage. Second, numbers. A Viking raiding party on a single longship might number 30 to 60 warriors. For the phalanx to function at its terrifying best, it needs width and depth. Enough men to overlap shields, form multiple ranks, and execute flanking movements. With small numbers on a beach, the Spartans' formation advantage is reduced. Third, weapons in context. The Spartan spear, the dory, is his primary killing tool. In open formation, on flat ground, it is devastating. On a beach, at close quarters, in the confused press of a skirmish, it becomes harder to use effectively. The Viking axe, by contrast, was designed exactly for this kind of fight. Close, chaotic, requiring individual power, and short-range brutality. And then there is the psychological dimension. The Berserker's primary tactical value is psychological disruption. He works against enemies who can be made afraid. The Spartan cannot be made afraid. Or more precisely, the Spartan has been trained so thoroughly in the management of fear, has been placed in controlled terror from the age of 7, that the Berserker's performance of fearlessness lands differently against him than it does against, say, a Saxon farmer who has never been in a serious fight. The Spartan has met fear before, every morning, from age 7, for 13 years. The Berserker is impressive. He is not unprecedented. Here is what the engagement probably looks like. The Viking shield wall forms quickly. These men have done this before, on dozens of beaches across Europe. The Spartan line forms. Disciplined, shields up, spears forward. But the beach limits the width of the formation. The deep ranks that give the phalanx its mechanical advantage cannot fully develop. The lines meet. And here is where it gets genuinely complicated. In the phalanx, the Spartan is extraordinary. In a melee, a close quarters, individual, chaotic fight, he is merely excellent. The honest answer, the one that respects both of these extraordinary warrior cultures, is that the outcome depends entirely on context. Scenario 1. Open field. Flat ground. The Spartans in full phalanx formation. The Vikings advancing. The Spartans win. And they win decisively. The phalanx on flat ground is one of the most effective infantry formations in the history of warfare. The Viking shield wall, disciplined but individually driven, cannot match the mechanical cohesion of men trained since childhood to function as a single organism. The Viking berserkers, charging the phalanx, face something they have never encountered: an enemy line that does not break under psychological pressure. The spears find them before they reach the shields. The phalanx grinds forward. The Viking formation, depending increasingly on individual courage against an enemy that fights as a machine, eventually breaks. Scenario 2. A surprise raid. Night or early dawn. The Vikings landing without warning. The Spartans sleeping, or more precisely, the Spartan garrison caught off guard, unable to form the phalanx before contact. This is the Vikings' optimal scenario, and it is the scenario they spent 2 centuries perfecting across Europe. Surprise, speed, violence before the enemy can organize a coordinated response. In this scenario, the Spartan's formation advantage disappears. He is still an extraordinary individual fighter, trained since childhood, fearless, skilled, carrying weapons he has used every day of his adult life. But in the chaos of a night raid, he is one very good fighter against a group of raiders who have done exactly this on dozens of beaches, in dozens of towns. The Vikings' tactical and experimental advantage in this specific environment is real. The Spartans' individual quality narrows the gap significantly. This one is close. Honest assessment, the Vikings probably win. On speed and tactical familiarity with the scenario, the Spartans probably take significantly more Vikings with them than any other opponent the Vikings have faced. Scenario 3. A full campaign. Both forces at their maximum strength. Months of engagement across multiple terrains. This is the most interesting scenario, and the most genuinely uncertain. The Spartan army at full strength, in its historical context, was the dominant land power in Greece for over 2 centuries. Disciplined, organized, capable of sustained campaigns. The Vikings' strategic advantage was mobility, the longship giving them the ability to strike anywhere along a coastline and withdraw before a response could be organized against a Spartan force that had the ability to predict and meet them on prepared ground. The Vikings' mobility advantage was reduced against the Spartan phalanx in open battle. The Spartans against Viking raids in coastal terrain where formation was impossible. The Vikings, the extended campaign, with both sides adapting to the other, would be the most brutal fighting either culture had ever encountered. So who wins? In the phalanx's optimal environment. Open ground, prepared positions, formation intact. The Spartans win. Not because the Vikings are inferior warriors. They are not. But because the phalanx, as a system, is specifically designed to defeat exactly the kind of individually excellent, formation-pressing aggression that the Viking shield wall represents. The Spartan formation produces a kind of mechanical superiority that individual excellence cannot overcome. Through courage alone. The Berserker is terrifying. The phalanx has an answer for terrifying. In the Vikings' optimal environment, the surprise raid, the night attack, the chaotic close-quarters fight, where formation is impossible, the Vikings have a genuine tactical advantage. Not because the Spartan is less skilled individually. He is not. But because the Viking raider has spent his entire military career operating in exactly this kind of confusion, making exactly these kinds of rapid decisions, in exactly this kind of chaotic environment. The Spartans' training optimized him for the organized engagement. The Vikings' experience optimized him for the organized chaos. But here is the most honest thing. This comparison reveals, and it is something that goes beyond the tactical question of who wins on what terrain. The Spartan and the Viking were solving the same fundamental human problem. How do you prepare a person to face death without flinching? Sparta's answer: begin at 7. Remove the family. Remove comfort. Remove the individual self until what remains is the formation. Norse culture's answer: build a theology in which death in battle is transcendence. Make the afterlife something to run toward, not away from. Make the alternative to dying in battle, dying of illness in a bed, something to be feared. Both systems produced human beings who could do things that most human beings cannot do, who could stand in the front rank of a battle line and hold, who could charge an enemy knowing they might not survive the next 10 seconds, who could look at the instruments of their own death and find, in their training or their theology, a reason not to run. The Spartan wins in formation. The Viking wins in chaos. And both of them, in their own environments, against the enemies they were built to face, were the most dangerous human beings alive on Earth. We ask, who would win, because it is a satisfying question. It has the shape of an answer. Someone wins. Someone loses. The debate is resolved. But the more interesting question, the one that the Spartan and the Viking force us to confront when we study them honestly, is what it costs to build a person like this. The Spartan warrior was extraordinary. He was also a person who had been taken from his family before his memory could fully form, placed in a system designed to eliminate the individual self and replace it with the phalanx's collective identity, and who spent his entire adult life in a state of permanent military readiness. He was, by the metrics of his own civilization, the perfect product of its philosophy. What that philosophy cost him personally, what was given up to make the machine work. The historical record does not much record, because the historical record was written by people who admired what the system produced, not by the people it produced. The Viking warrior chose his violence, or was raised to choose it, in a culture that made that choice feel sacred. To die in battle was to earn a place at Odin's table. To live in peace and die in your bed was to become straw death. The inglorious end, the thing to be avoided. A culture that makes dying in battle the highest aspiration of its members. Produces extraordinary warriors. It also produces extraordinary casualties. The Viking Age ended not because someone conquered it. It ended because the Norse peoples, gradually, converted to Christianity. And with conversion came a theology that valued life differently. That found meaning in things other than the battlefield. Sparta's end was not military defeat. It was mathematics. The Helot system, the enslaved population that farmed Spartan land so that Spartan men could spend their lives in military training, was always demographically precarious. The Spartan citizen class, always small, shrank further with every generation of battle losses. By the time Rome reached dominance, the Spartans were a historical curiosity, conducting public displays of their egoge for Roman tourists who came to watch. Children being beaten as a cultural experience. The greatest warriors the ancient world produced became a living museum exhibit. Both the Spartan system and the Viking culture were built to produce the most effective warriors their civilizations could imagine. Both succeeded. Both also contained, within their success, the seeds of their own endings. The Spartan said, the individual is nothing. The formation is everything. The system that produced warriors also produced a society that could not survive the attrition of its own wars. The Viking said, the individual's glory is everything. The death in battle is the meaning. The culture that celebrated violence could not sustain its own theology against the gentler promise of another faith. Who wins? On the open field, in the phalanx. The Spartan. In the chaos of the raid. The Viking. But the most dangerous question is not which warrior wins the fight. It is what you are willing to become in order to win it. The Spartan sacrificed the individual for the perfection of the formation. The Viking sacrificed the future for the glory of the present moment. Both built warriors that the world still talks about 3,000 years later. Both built civilizations that their own warriors outlasted.